For anyone scrolling through social media this week, here's a small challenge. Read a few posts. Don't look at the names, just read the words. Now, one post accuses a media house of extortion and gangsterism. Another warns of state-sponsored killer squads. A third responds with threats of, quote, dire consequences. Now ask yourself this. Could you tell which of those posts came from the president? Which one from a cabinet secretary? Which one from a former deputy president? Or would you assume they were all written by anonymous accounts chasing outrage and engagement? You see, somewhere along the way, our leaders stopped communicating like statesmen and started posting like influencers in a never-ending online feud. And that should concern all of us, because leadership is communicated not just through decisions, but through language. Words matter, not because leaders should speak in polished diplomatic cliches while the country burns. Passion certainly has its place. Disagreement is healthy. Robust political debate is essential in any democracy.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, guys, for your great support. Now, fellow Kenyans, what is funny with our nation, or what is funny with our country, is that one topic normally leads to the other. One narrative leads to the other. And most of the time, a narrative that leads to the other narrative is normally not a good narrative. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because as we speak right now, the narrative that is there is, remember the Gen Z demonstration that is on 25th last month. It is being said that a lot of people abducted themselves. Remember when PS of Interior, that is Raymond Omolo, was saying or said that those people who are claiming that have been abducted are in their houses. They've closed their doors in their houses and they're sleeping. And remember, I also showed you this video of this young man who was being harassed by police officers, and then they handed him over to the plainclothes police officers with mask, and they put him in a Subaru, in the boot of a Subaru, and then they went with him. Up to now, nobody knows who this boy was and where he is as we speak. But there is a narrative that has been accumulating, that has been circulating all over the internet right now, that people are abducting themselves.
For anyone scrolling through social media this week, here's a small challenge. Read a few posts. Don't look at the names, just read the words. Now, one post accuses a media house of extortion and gangsterism. Another warns of state-sponsored killer squads. A third responds with threats of, quote, dire consequences. Now ask yourself this. Could you tell which of those posts came from the president? Which one from a cabinet secretary? Which one from a former deputy president? Or would you assume they were all written by anonymous accounts chasing outrage and engagement? You see, somewhere along the way, our leaders stopped communicating like statesmen and started posting like influencers in a never-ending online feud. And that should concern all of us, because leadership is communicated not just through decisions, but through language. Words matter, not because leaders should speak in polished diplomatic cliches while the country burns. Passion certainly has its place. Disagreement is healthy. Robust political debate is essential in any democracy. But there is a difference between robust disagreement and perpetual provocation. There is a difference between accountability and antagonism. And there is certainly a difference between political leadership and performative online combat. Social media, as we all know, rewards the quickest insult, the sharpest clapback, the most outrageous accusation. The algorithms don't reward nuance. They reward engagement. And outrage travels far faster than reason. The problem is that our leaders seem to have accepted those rules. Every disagreement becomes a public spectacle. every criticism becomes a personal attack. Every response must be harsher than the last. The line between governing and content creation is becoming dangerously blurred. And if those occupying the highest offices in the land begin speaking exactly like the loudest voices in the comments section, who then sets the standard? Who models restraint? Who demonstrates that authority is measured not by volume, but by judgment? And not in caps either. This matters because political language is contagious. You see, citizens borrow cues from leaders. And if leaders insult, supporters will insult louder. If leaders threaten, supporters will escalate further. If leaders abandon civility, why should anyone else preserve it? Perhaps this explains why our public discourse feels increasingly angry, increasingly suspicious, and increasingly impossible. We've normalized a politics in which every conversation must end with humiliation of the other person, rather than persuasion. Where victory isn't convincing your opponent, it's embarrassing them. And maybe that's the bigger loss. Because leadership simply isn't about winning arguments. It's about setting the tone of a nation. Our Constitution gives public officers immense authority. And it also expects something in return. Dignity, integrity, and leadership worthy of public trust. Perhaps it's time we expected those values not only in the decisions they make, but also in the words they choose. Public trust is built as much by the language leaders use as by the policies they announce. But when every message sounds like a political brawl, even serious governance begins to look like just another social media contest. Because if we can no longer distinguish the voice of a head of state, a cabinet secretary, or a former deputy president from that of an anonymous account chasing the next viral moment, then we have lowered the office long before we've elevated the conversation.
A bit of more details and finality.
Yeah, and while you talk about what the police is set to do or investigate, like you say, if people are faking their abductions, then investigate that as well and hold them to account if the evidence leads that way. But while the police acknowledged, the report of Davis Lee Chuma and said they were going to look into it, I'd like us to listen to the PS in Interior, Raymond Omolo, on the cases of abductions and enforced disappearances in the country.
Hiyo mambo ya utekaji nyara ni mambo ilipitwa na wakati. Actually katika ile serikali iliyopita ndio tulikuwa na hiyo changamoto ya watu walikuwa wanatekwa nyara ama wanakuwa abducted. Wengine walikuwa wanapatikana kwa mito na sehemu zingine tofauti.
And this is what he had to say about the victims themselves.
As it is, the cases that I would call them purported abduction. People sleeping or locking themselves in their bedrooms and then they go out there. And I think as a media, you need to help us.
And on Citizen TV yesterday night, during the news gang, this is something that has been talked about, or this is something that was talked about by YVON Okwara. Kaikai talked about it. Sam Gituk also talked about it. Bonyo also talked about it. And in fact, Jamila was bringing it like deny, deny, deny. This one is happening and is being denied by the government.
It is one of the oldest tricks in the Kenyan book. You simply say, it did not happen. Ulisikia wapi? Nani alikwambia? Deny, deny, deny. Is it sunrise? No, it is not. Is it midday? Who told you? Is it sunset? Of course not. Wait for official confirmation. Is today Thursday? No, it is not. Nani alikwambia leo ni Alhamisi? That is how we do it in Kenya. By the way, was any money lost in that grand project? Which money? Which project? Maybe only 7 shillings. But actually, nothing was lost. Denial, denial, denial. Did abductions happen? Which abductions? Who? Who told you? And if they happened, maybe they abducted themselves. And was Senegal eliminated from the World Cup last night? Of course not. Hii ni poroja ya watu wa magazeti, fake news, fake media, unpatriotic journalists. So what do we intend to gain with these denials? How far are we willing to go denying everything, even the obvious, even what has been recorded or has been seen, even what has evidence, as we say, kwa karatasi? Because that is where we are now. We no longer deny only what is hidden. We deny what is in broad daylight. We deny families crying on camera. We deny people disappearing. We deny people reappearing with stories of what happened to them. We deny, then appoint a committee, then promise investigations, and then blame the oppositions, or the media, or even the activists. In fact, we deny, then blame Kenyans for asking questions. There comes a time when denial stops being strategy, and then it becomes an insult. An insult to victims, to families, to the public, and an insult to plain common sense. Because if a citizen disappears, the answer cannot be, who told you? If a mother is looking for a child, the answer cannot be, that is fake news. You see, denial may buy time, but it does not build trust, nor does it heal wounds. And it certainly does not make the truth disappear. So maybe tonight, before we deny the next thing, we should ask ourselves one simple question. If everything is fake, if everything is propaganda, and if everything is porojo ya watu wa magazeti, then why are so many families still crying? And by the way, I am not Jamila. Absolutely not. And this is definitely not my memo.
The government is always responsible for everything that is happening in our country or in our nation. But what do? They deny these things. They say that these things are not happening. They say that these things don't happen in our country, yet we see them. You know, you can't deny things that are happening in your own eyes. Hizi vitu zinafanyika lakini mnasema kwamba hazifanyiki. Why? We can't live in a country where things are happening and nobody cares. Now, I want you to listen to the news gang. And I think the same thing that happened to the KTN, I normally say that I think ni ile tu ijafika wakati wa Citizen. Lakini the same thing that happened to the KTN, remember when William Ruto was bashing them, might also happen to Citizen TV, especially because of these things that they are doing, because they're just doing the same thing that NTV, the KTN was doing. And they've also bashed what happened in Uganda, where NTV and some media stations were shut down by General Muhoozi. But I think they cannot do that in Kenya, where government, the least thing that a government can do is to threaten a media station, but they cannot go as far as shutting it down. They cannot do that. In fact, Kenyan constitution doesn't allow a government to do that. They can't. They can't do that. So I want you to listen to this news gang, and then after listening to it, you tell me what you think at the comment section, because as again, hizi vitu zinafanyika zinakuwa on goal. Briefly, Sam Gituki is talking about the state launch.
Sam.
Yeah, if you look at the Constitution of Uganda, which I have before me here, it says a few things, especially when you're talking about freedom, which I'll get into. But before I do, if you have to look at Article 209 of the Uganda Constitution, it talks about the functions of the defense forces. And the functions of the Uganda People's Defense Forces are to preserve and defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Uganda, to cooperate with the civilian authority in emergency situations and in cases of natural disasters, to foster harmony and understanding between the defense forces and civilians, and then to engage in productive activities for the development of Uganda. And that is replicated in the act itself that establishes the defense forces. So you'll find almost a replica of the same in section 7 of the act on what those functions should be. But what I find interesting is also the chain of command, because there's a commander-in-chief who by the constitution is the president. Then it says that the commander-in-chief may appoint an office of the defense forces to be known as the chief of defense forces, to be head of the defense forces, who shall be responsible for the command, control, and administration of the defense forces. Now, that person is General Muhoozi, obviously the son of the president of Uganda. But when you are to scan through that act and the constitution, you do not see where the defense intervene on matters of broadcasting. And if you're to even look at the Kenyan setup of the constitution and also the Kenya Defense Forces, the establishment of that, there's nowhere that you'll find the military getting involved in management or regulation of the media. Again, Uganda has several laws that guide that. Apart from the constitution, you have the Law on Press and Journalist Act of 1995, which establishes the Uganda Media Council. It's the equivalent of Media Council of Kenya, but obviously there has been a lot of complaints on how stringent they have been. Instead of facilitating media freedom, is actually instances of curtailing it. Then there's the Uganda Communications Commission, which is established through an act of parliament, again has been faulted for the some of the measures that it brings about on controlling even the content that the media would be advancing in that jurisdiction. Then there's a new law, not exactly new, but it's similar to what we've seen in Kenya, the Computer Misuse Act of 2011. I think for us we have the cyber crimes law that I think there's actually a matter that has just been decided at the courts.
Yeah, about shutting down websites.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you look at all this legal setup and then you compare that to, let me just go back to Article 29 of the Constitution of Uganda, because then it tells you in not so many words, protection of freedom of conscience, expression, movement, religion, assembly, and association. Then it goes to say in Sub-Article 1 that every person shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. And it ends there. You do not see any other detail on how that freedom is supposed to be exercised. If you're to look at the Kenyan Constitution of 2010, there are several articles that facilitate the freedom of expression. If you're to even talk about Article 37 on picketing, then you talk about Article 33, Article 34, and Article 35. Article 35 on the right to access to information, Article 34 on the freedom of the media, Article 33 on the freedom of expression, Article 32 on the freedom of conscience, opinion, and religion and other matters. So, not to fault the Constitution of Uganda, but you see that there's a gap. It has not been developed to show you that this is how the Republic of Uganda, the people of Uganda have decided they should be treated when it comes to expression, when it comes to management of the media. So therefore, to see the events of the last 5 days that you've seen an entire media house, which is a regional media house, having to face the consequences of the views of those that are in government, it's pretty worrying, because you'd have expected, if you had to compare Kenya and Uganda, you'd have expected that the situation you've seen in Kenya, at least we don't like it, we don't necessarily agree with it, but at least you see warnings coming from the regulating institutions. I do not think the People's Defense Forces actually regulates the media in Uganda. So there's a bit of work there to do. And again, as you keep talking about, we are a country that sits within the East African community. What do the presidents of these East African countries, and now the community is bigger, what do they talk about when they meet? Because if you have to look at this freedom, the human rights in the countries that are our neighbors, and even the new members that have joined EAC in the recent past, you don't see a lot of freedom there. You don't see a lot of people free to express themselves. So really, I do not know how this will end. But obviously, there's also an element of a country isolating itself from the bigger global scale. Well, that may be an intention because of the history that the country believes it has come from in recent past, but also at least over the past 40 years and more. But there has to come a time that the people of East Africa have to decide, how do they want to be governed? How do you want to move forward if all of us are to move towards modernity and a developed status like we keep talking about?
And,
And let me ask this question. What is normally priority? Of course, we know very well that state launch is very much important in our nation, but what is the priority? There is a state launch that was built in Northeastern, where the president was there, spent his time there. But is that a priority? Can those people say that they have development? That is a state launch. Anyway, That is a question that I think you are in a better position to answer after listening to the whole scenario. And then you also tell me what you think at the comment section.
It is clearly a very difficult promise to keep. And you realize that in the 2022 presidential campaign, one of the promises of President Ruto's Kenya Kwanza administration was kusema na kutenda, which is to say and then do exactly as you say. Similarly on this issue of weaponization, like the president says there during his campaign, weaponization of, political weaponization of state institutions, we can only conclude in the absence of evidence to the contrary that this is going on right now. This is what we see with the police coming in terms of the intervention in the second anniversary of the Gen Z 2024 protests. What clearly happened and what we could clearly read was there was a major operation just to ensure that there are no protests. And this operation, it goes without saying, targeted suspected organizers. And these are the people that are ending up in court. We saw Babu Owino and James Orengo and other teams of lawyers crisscrossing courtrooms to plead and represent some of those that were arrested during the anniversary intended protests. These protests could not take place, and the reason they did not take place is not because people stayed home, but because there was a very deliberate operation that targeted the perceived organizers. These activists, some of them were arrested on their way to the streets. Now, is this weaponization of state institutions to serve political purposes? Yes, it is. Yes, indeed it is. Because there is the right to express yourselves through demonstration. That has yet to be exercised when we have operations like we saw last Thursday, Yvonne. And you see, this is where the delay happens in terms of getting the country to mature politically. We need to see a situation where a protest, a demonstration has actually been allowed to take place lawfully. We also don't need to see violence. It should be peaceful. We also don't need to see people armed on the streets. But we are still in that experiment stage. We are seeing state institutions intervening, sometimes in the name of security, and wrongly so, because the truth is they're intervening politically, not from a security perspective. And I'll give a very simple example. The little march that was done from Serena to heading to parliament buildings by the families and a couple of leaders from the opposition. That march did not reach the parliament destination without being disrupted. Then there's something else that we are increasingly seeing, and that is there's so many centers of intervention. Let me not call them centers of power. Because there was one group of policemen that was leading that group to peacefully march to lay their wreath, their flowers. But then there was another one that came in with loud sirens and then dispersed them. Who's commanding who? And then there are policemen in uniform and in trucks and marked police vehicles. Then there are the Subarus, and indeed, like Order Francis reported, we also had SUVs. So when you see this, it's actually a manifestation of that politicization of state security services for purposes of politics. So we still have a long way to go, Yvonne. This current environment just tells you what was promised is yet to be realized.
And you know, as we close this conversation, Linus, because we like to compare ourselves to Sam.
Very harrowing tales of those individuals who were lucky to be speaking from a hospital to tell their story. And I don't know if you remember that last week as we were talking about how the police treated some of the protesters. The gentleman who just spoke was one of those who was in all white on the day when he was shielding another man who was carrying flowers, planning to lay them at the precincts of Parliament. So really, when you look at those images and you see them, the stories that they share about what exactly happened to them, it still tells the story of how the National Police Service, or those people that were actually holding them, continue to treat them. And this is what everyone else who has spoken about human rights in the country has been speaking against, because if you are suspected of committing a certain offense, you are arrested and taken to a police station, and after that you are arraigned. And I think there were a series of individuals that were presented before court in the days that followed the protest, that is specifically on Friday, and many of them are actually released on a cash bail of about 1,000 shillings. So really you wonder, why were these individuals denied that opportunity to be arrested, treated humanely, presented before court? Charges are opened if the ODPP has given the okay to continue and charge them, or if not so, to request for time to continue holding them in police cells, because that's what is lawful. That's what the provisions of the law are. So really, to again talk about the situation, I remember on Sunday during the day there was that press conference by a team of human rights activists that were also joined by former Chief Justice David Maraga, and they were even threatening that there would be demonstrations in this country come Tuesday if he was not to be found, if Lichuma was not to be found. Only for late that night, we saw those images of Lichuma where he was found, taken to the Kenyatta National Hospital, and later on to another hospital for medical attention. So to look at those images, because I remember seeing those images on Monday morning as we were carrying out the show Daybreak, it tells of someone who is in some different world. I know the medical reports, or the reports you're receiving, say that there is no evidence of physical trauma that may have been caused on the body of Lichuma, but when you look at him, there appears to be something that is going on, and I don't know if it's possible to get an investigation that really reveals what's happening. But this is not the first time we've seen people tortured or mistreated in the custody of security personnel, and when they end up coming out to the public, they're harrowing tales that some of them sometimes they're unable to tell. So you just hope that despite what we've heard from, I think, Principal Secretary Dr. Raymond Omolo saying that no abduction is happening, and some people are pretenders. You've heard of instances where people have even used the case of a former member of parliament who is claimed to have abducted himself not too long ago. I think it was in the year 2025. It's surprising to hear of the official denial. I think even as the government tells its side of the story, it is also important for it to take up this matter, to go ahead and investigate these claims. And you recall that there was a statement from the National Police Service through its spokesperson, Mushiri, who was saying that they have received reports of missing persons, and they are taking the reports of missing persons seriously. They are asking the people who have more information to come and provide it to them so that they can go ahead and investigate. I don't know if you've heard of an update from the National Police Service, because yes, reports continue to be received. There was a missing person report of Lichuma, Davis Lichuma. Eventually was found in a hospital, transferred to a different hospital, unable to speak. Has the police investigated this? What is the status update? Because if the official statements are to be taken seriously, then also the National Police Service, which is utumishi kwa wote, it owes an explanation to Kenyans. Because if on Sunday you give a statement based on what activists were saying, how about now that the person has been received? Have you recorded statements? Have you started investigations into what could have happened? Because all these things are possible. If he was picked up by, as we are told, border riders along Ngong Road, is there a possibility to actually investigate that matter? That's a road that sometimes has cameras. What would they show in terms of the events of that evening? So really, we've not heard of progress in regards to this matter. We can only hope that there will be a bit of more details and finality.
Yeah, and while you talk about what the police is set to do, or
now, State House and state lodges are restricted, very restricted areas. If you're talking of inclusion, I mean, there are a lot of them that are currently not occupied and are not in any use, but you don't see locals going in there to sit there. we are talking of inclusion. It's the most ridiculous thing I've heard, and especially from the governor of Meru. I don't know how a state lodge is a sign of inclusivity. We all accepted that Nairobi is the national capital of this country. I mean, what will be the next thing? We'll have regions starting to demand that you have cabinet meetings there or ministries there. If you're talking of inclusion, I think we're having a really ridiculous conversation as a country. 8 months ago, when the Kitui one was launched, actually my kicker was about, can we stop this state lodges madness? And I called it madness because indeed it is. How do you explain? Because these facilities are used once in a while, once in a very, very long while. But the maintenance is full-time. And in fact, the cost of putting it up is not easy. Now, I know we aspire and we keep talking about other nations. We talk about Singapore, for example. Singapore has one official residence of the president, and it has no official residence for prime ministers. Prime ministers operate from their private homes. So we want to be like Singapore, but we come in with the fiscal discipline of Zaire, those days, where you put lodges all over. I think it's just a question of priority. This is another unnecessary project. Oh, there is an airstrip that is coming up in the middle of a forest,
right?
Complete with its own elephants in the room. Meru is exactly 52 minutes by road from the Isiolo International Airport. If we are talking of flying, we have not even utilized the Isiolo International Airport properly. It's 52 minutes, and 52 minutes is a reasonable distance for an international airport. So it's just back to a question of priorities. Maybe we need these things in future when we are rich, we have met all these needs. Meru has the hospitals that they need, the governor is happy. Now you can have an airstrip and another state lodge. It's a question of priority. It's a question of priority, and also a question of, honestly, can I call it basic logic? Like, do you really need that facility for a one-night stay by the president? Last time in the kick, I think I called it, these are national Airbnbs. And another one is just about to come up. It's a question of priorities, and we are having a very ridiculous conversation as a country.
Sign of inclusivity, you said.
But guys, you know,